Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third podcast in Solidarity of Service. The first two, Sherman and I interviewed each other, two Marines with one mission, and we're expanding that out today to include a third Marine who we both know now and who we both have served with. And at the beginning of the podcast number two, when you interviewed me, Sherman, we talked about intersections. It's been a common theme, and I know from our guest today, it's probably apparent to people when they saw the title of the podcast, Chief Operating Officer at Operation Gratitude, that clearly my path has intersected with Paul in terms of service, but our service goes way back, and I want to start off with the first question for Paul today, because that first intersection happened in the Marine Corps, and our careers intersected in lots of different ways. But just so our listeners get to know you a little bit, Paul, like I know you and Sherman's growing to know you, it would be great if you could share with all of them why you chose to serve in our military, and more specifically in the United States Marine Corps.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here with you and Sherman and to get to know Sherman the last couple of days a little bit more. And it's great when you share experiences and stories with Marines, because you find all kinds of intersections, places you've been, Marines you served with. And if you don't know the Marine by name, you know them by type, right? The Marines that have served for over 200 years, they're the same people, just recycled. But for me, I think I always knew I wanted to be a Marine. My father served in the Marine Corps in the late 50s and just for a very short time. So I grew up hearing stories about the Marine Corps and the value of what the Marines have offered our nation. I still think back to a letter that I have in my house, my mom's house actually, and it's written by some Marine captain, I can't remember his name, in the 70s, and it's to me, and it says, "Dear Mr. Cucinotta, thank you for your interest in the Marine Corps. However, since you were only 7, we recommend you stay in school and come see us on your 18th birthday," that kind of thing. And my mom would tell me that I was always tearing off those little pamphlets inside of magazines, right? Back in those days, that's how we advertised. And I would fill out the card, I'd send it off. The Marines would send me, the iron-on logo, and then they'd, look at my birth date and send me one of those letters. So it was just a natural course of my life. I don't think I had planned to stay in as a career. I really didn't know what I was going to do. But after my first tour, I had some unique opportunities to get an education, a master's degree. That's where I met Kevin the first time. And then I continued to serve in the Marine Corps, and one tour led to 2, to 3, to 4, and it was really about the continued opportunity to serve. And I think the defining moment for us as a family was when my wife was diagnosed with cancer. And the way the Marine Corps served us, right? I mean, we talk about solidarity of service, right? Marines serving one another and together. And there's another Marine, Chris Naylor, who I didn't know then. He was soon to be the battalion OPSO for the battalion that I went to, was serving as the XO at the time. And my wife and I and family had just PCS from DC to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We were still living in the BOQ, the Bachelor Officer Quarters, and my wife had kind of a surgery and then was put into the hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina, maybe a 3-hour drive from Lejeune. I hadn't even checked into my battalion yet. They wouldn't know me by face. And I called the command, let them know what was going on. I might be a little bit late on checking in. And Chris Naylor got flowers and drove from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina to the hospital at UNC there in Raleigh, North Carolina. Spent 2 minutes with my wife, dropping off the flowers, saying these are from 2nd Battalion, 10th Marines, and then drove all the way back. That level of service for a Marine he didn't know. I mean, he knew me because he knew Marines, but he didn't know me personally. He didn't know my family. But for him to do that, and then the way I was treated by the battalion, by my friends in the Marine Corps, and I could tell story after story about that experience, but that, for us, we owed something back to somebody, right? So my continuation of service at that point for another 17 years was because of that, right? And I don't know if Chris even knows, right?
He does now.
He does now, but I don't know if he knows the impact that he had. And of course, all the friends around us too. He's just one example of several Marines and sailors, frankly, that came to our aid during that time. So, and then I continued my career, served in a variety of organizations all over the globe, and then we hit our 27-year mark, and then we'll talk about that in a bit, how intersections came between Kevin and I. But so that's my service in a nutshell.
See, Sherman, if we let Paul talk, he would cover all the questions that we did in one go. Exactly. We're going to break it up a little bit. I guess as Marines, we all stayed around for a while. Did you see the same thing too, and kind of Marines coming and rallying around you when you suffered from your injury too?
I think that my family was in the Marine Corps at the time. I was in California, away from my physical family. My mom did come in, but almost every single Marine I worked with, every officer, my series commander at Parris Island, they just showed up. They came from all over, and it's this sort of bubble that closes around you. And I think a lot of it was they saw my career preempted by the injury, but they also knew how much it meant to me to have that uniform, and I wouldn't be wearing it much longer. So I think and that followed me after my career. So I was glad to see
it's this community, right?
Exactly.
We talk a little bit about our lives intersecting and creating these communities of doers, right? And the reason we stayed in the Marine Corps, and probably the reason that we're doing what we're doing today, is because we want to create that same sense of community, that we want to almost replicate what we saw in the Marine Corps with people like that. And there is a solidarity of service, which is why this podcast is so poignant to us, and the name of it is so poignant, because that's what we found in the Marine Corps, and we know that's the solution to the divides that exist. There is no crack anywhere in the Marine Corps in terms of a division, right? Because we have that common bond of service. And I think that's what we're trying to get to with this podcast.
I do have a question I want to ask Paul, though, because I asked you the question, did you have to salute your dad, or did he have to salute you when you became an officer?
Yeah, no, my dad was a private. So,
okay.
But like Kevin, I've heard Kevin's story about his dad administering the oath. Probably one of my dad's proudest moments, I think, when I got commissioned. He got through the first few words, and we were just overcome by emotion. Mm-hmm. And like Kevin, I had a great Marine officer instructor there, a guy named Major Vernon Moses, who stepped right up, right, without missing a beat, and got through the oath. Yeah, very special moment. My dad passed away almost 2 years ago now, so that was a special moment when I think back to that. Almost like, passing of the guard, right? I mean, passing of the watch, right? And good for our family too, right? My family has served. I have a grandfather that served in World War II. I have an uncle that served in the Coast Guard as a career Coast Guard officer. I have cousins that have served, second and third cousins that served in wartime in World War II. So it was kind of continuation of that service. And my son serves now too, so we're going one more generation.
So this is a great point. People who are listening are going to understand why I hired Paul as our COO, because we share the same stories, so we're kind of interchangeable. He can do any interview that I can do and talk publicly about what we do, because we share a lot of the same background in terms of how we found service and what we were inspired to do. I teased you a little bit, Paul, about going into the second question that we were going to ask, because one of the things that I think people would like to know more about is your service. You tried to sum up 27 years in the Marine Corps in just a couple minutes, but there was obviously much more than that. And one of the things that we try to do as an organization, and what we're trying to do with this podcast, is create a better understanding, empathy for what service is and what sacrifice is. So you've heard me say and count the nights that we didn't tuck our kids into bed or eat dinner with them. But your service certainly over 27 years is pretty significant in the sacrifices that you and Beth and the kids made. So I think we're going to put you on the spot to tell us a little bit more about that and not get away with a couple minutes to summarize 27 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. My first tour was in an artillery battalion in Hawaii, right? So a hardship tour out in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. But during that 3 years we lived in Hawaii, I was off the island training somewhere or deployed somewhere for more than 400 days. So more than a year, so more than a third of the time. And I was married then, so my wife, really her first time away from home, right? We got married and that was it. And so she did a lot of that on her own, which has its pros and cons, right? It's an opportunity to grow up, but also you're lonely at times. My daughter was born there just before my second deployment, 6-month deployment, and I remember she was born, my mom came out, and I left for 30 days, right? So I missed all that. I saw her for about a week or so, and then gone for 30 days. Came home for a little over a month, then gone for 6 months for a deployment. So I missed the better part of her first year. And I remember at the time, that was enough, right? I was literally, that was it, we're gonna get out. It's great, I love the Marine Corps, but boy, that was painful being away from my family. It was really hard, especially your first child. And you're young too, so you don't have the resilience, you haven't built it up yet. But I was fortunate enough to get selected for a program to go get my master's degree at Monterey, California, the first time I met Kevin in the mid-90s, and went there and got my degree. And 18 months going to school, seeing my family every day, you forget about the hardship, right? You bask in the good times. And then I did an assignment here in DC at the Pentagon as a young captain. And a captain in the Pentagon is, might as well be in the mailroom, right? So that was a hard assignment, but probably most challenging because I miss Marines. And I was serving in a different way, but I didn't feel that service in the same way because I wasn't working with Marines day in and day out, and not just training with them, but also learning about their families and their challenges and helping them, or trying to at least overcome those. And I remember distinctly, I actually went down and saw Kevin. Fortunately, I had a meeting down in Quantico, and I went down there, and Kevin and a good friend of ours, Rod Brewster, and I met for a run. You may not remember it. I had a meeting in the morning. We met, noontime PT, like Marines like to do, and went for a run. And it was, God had scripted it for me, right? Everywhere we went, there was a group of Marines, right? PTing, saying good morning or good afternoon in that case. And just seeing the Marine Corps, the rawness of it, right? Young Marines out doing Marine things. And I remember I went home that night and told my wife, we got to do one more tour. Just one more. Let's go back to the fleet. Let's go back and see Marines again. So I did. And that's when she got cancer. So that was a very challenging tour for us. Challenging from a Marine Corps standpoint, but challenging from a family standpoint, right? Even to this day, I think that puts a little friction in our relationship, my wife and I, because I'll be honest with you, I put the Marine Corps ahead of my family there, right? I made a mistake, right, that I probably made more than once. And not out of any sort of, bravado, I got to be a Marine first. It was really about my view of what my service meant, right? My Marines needed me. I would tell myself, my Marines needed me. I needed to be there. And that may be true, but my family needed me too, right? So balancing that service is a challenge. I think a lot of service members have that challenge, and to talk through it and share about it. Deployed a couple times there, mostly CONUS-based deployments. Go out to CAX for 2 months. Went and fought fires up in Idaho. And then a lot of local deployments between Fort Bragg and places in the Carolinas and up and down this coast. Then I went to school. Then I went and served in a very unique assignment with the 75th Ranger Regiment as a Marine exchange officer. For Marines listening today, they won't like me saying this, but 3 of my best years in service were the 3 years I spent with the Ranger Regiment. Just incredible people. Young Rangers are just like young Marines, just really focused on the mission, hard chargers. And quite a few Marines in that Ranger Regiment serving in the Army now, because they had done a tour in the Marine Corps, and then they would, maybe they wanted to become an infantry Marine. They couldn't. They were in a different MOS, and they were driven by that. So they crossed over to the Army. But I will tell you, they found me. I didn't go find them, right? So I'm wearing my Marine uniform, and one by one, through the course of that 3-year assignment, they would come up to me, "Hey, sir, I was a Marine." I was like, "Oh, hold on there, devil dog. You are a Marine, just wearing a different uniform today, right? Once a Marine, always a Marine." But so that was a great assignment. Tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, a couple times to well, almost 4 deployments there, depending on how you count the numbers. So lots of time deploying there, and then I got promoted again, went to camp. Over to the West Coast, California. Did an assignment out there. Interestingly enough, in that assignment in Southern California, before I even knew about Operation Gratitude, I met Carolyn, our founder. Talk about intersections. Mm-hmm. And through a mutual friend, Carolyn and her son Jordan came to see me to talk about the Marine Corps, because Jordan was thinking about joining the Marine Corps as an officer through one of our officer programs. And so he came and sat in my office for an hour. I talked about the Marine Corps. And
we talked about that when we went for a run.
Yeah.
When I first took the job at Operation Gratitude.
Yeah. So interesting, right? How those intersections happen. And of course, Jordan, served and deployed and did his time as a Marine. And but I left that assignment, came back to this coast, went to school again. The War College, went and did some time in the Pentagon. Deployed overseas, came back, did some time at Parris Island, and then finished up my career here in D.C. So, probably over the course of a 17-year career, a couple of years away from my family, total time. 5 Christmases, I think I was away, countless birthdays, holidays, right? And they pay the price, right? A lot of times we talk about our sacrifice as Marines, but truth be told, we're doing what we want to do. And of course it hurts, and it's hard to be away from the family. But those that sacrifice the most are the families, right? I think about my children now and seeing how they've grown up, and most of that, if not all of that, is to my wife's credit. Yeah, she gets the credit for that. But you don't recognize the impact it has on them when you're gone. And now when I talk to them, they talk about it now. They're mostly grown. My youngest is 16, and then I got 3 that are older than that, in their 20s, and they talk about how tough it was, right, with Dad being away. And I think we have to recognize that too, because they're serving as well, right? And while I choose to serve, and I suppose my wife chose to be there, right? She could have chosen a different path maybe, but they're serving for sure, and dealing with that. And then trying to understand that, right? I go back to my story about cancer. I go back to deploying away from Christmas. I don't say those things that I want people to feel sorry about, for us, right? There's none of this. We don't want any pity. I mean, even when I look back at how people reacted to what our needs were, and even when we didn't know what they were, when Beth was sick, I remember distinctly one morning, we lived out in a community in Camp Lejeune, there's a knock at my door. I go to the door, there's a guy I never saw before, and he says, "Hey," introduced himself. He was actually a Navy doctor, a flight surgeon from one of the Cobra squadrons. Through a friend of ours, he had heard about us. He drove by my house and he noticed my grass was pretty long. So he said to me, "Hey, don't call the police. I'm going to be in your backyard mowing your grass." And I said, "Hey, I don't need you to mow my grass in the backyard." And he says, "Listen, I'm not asking you. I'm just telling you, when you see me back there, don't call the police. I'm doing it," right? And that kind of service, right? Taking care of the family, and really community, right? This is the community coming together. And this wasn't out of pity, this wasn't out of any sort of need, but probably out of empathy, right? He had seen other Marines, other sailors, maybe experienced something himself. He had walked in my shoes, either himself or through somebody he knew. And he knew that's what we needed. We needed that little bit of help. And he knew that would free me up to do something else that day with my kids, right? So that's how the community, the Navy Marine Corps team, comes together. And having served with the Army, they're no different. They do the exact same thing to take care of one another first. And it's about doing that to maintain the mission, right? To keep, the soldiers and the Marines and the sailors and the airmen in the fight, so to speak. But it's building that community and making it stronger, because they know the next hurdle could be higher, right? And somebody else is going to step up to help them get over that.
You made a comment about your desire to be a Marine, and it comes at a sacrifice for the family. Today, we've got a lot of first responders who have to go to those hospitals. They have to put those masks on and expose themselves to danger, essentially. And then they have to come home and in many cases isolate themselves. So I think that type of service, it's easy to overlook its importance, because we are having fun and we do take a lot of pride in it, but somebody has to be that Marine standing that guard at any particular time where you were that one that had to do it. So I think that your story, while it is deferential to your family, you know, you had to be there. That was your calling, and we see that today, and we hope that a lot of the first responders, while we enjoy being Marines because of how awesome it is, that they also have that feeling of pride that we took away from those experiences, even at the expense of our families. So I just wanted to point out that while your family, and I'm glad they got to express to you that, yeah, you were away and we'd rather have you there, but they also see how important it was for you to be there for your country.
And my daughter's here today, right? We're at the DC National Guard Armory making care packages for veterans, right? So she chose to be here today as a way for her to serve, but she recognizes the value, right? Being from a Marine family, she recognizes the value that we'll have by just these simple but very tangible gestures of goodwill as we reach out and we bring that community, the veteran community, closer to those who don't serve or those who have served. And everybody serves in different ways, right? I mean, this COVID-19 situation has let us, see a little more into the lives of our first responders and frontline responders. And you look at the medical community, doctors and nurses that are working in hospitals across the country. And we saw the videos, and I'll be honest with you, Sherman, I saw some of those videos early on, late March, early April, in these hospitals in New York, hospitals in Washington, hospitals in Atlanta, Phoenix, other places around the country. And you look at the video, and I've seen mass casualty in places like Baghdad. It doesn't look much different, right? It was a combat zone. So sometimes we'll say, well, that doctor's making this much money. They chose that profession, but maybe the profession chose them a little bit, right? That's their calling to serve. Firefighters and police officers are the same way. And there's a level of pride too. So I just saw a gentleman here today. I gave him a thin blue line bracelet, put it on his wrist, and he was about 6'1", standing tall already. When I put that bracelet on his wrist, he was about 6'2", 6'3", right? I mean, their level of pride. The firefighters are the same deal. We went and visited some firefighters in Arlington, and if you look at how they wear their uniform, right, you can tell they're proud about what they do. But you can also, when you get to talk to them and you hear about their experiences, they're there for their community, right? It's about serving. It's about bringing the community together, making the community stronger in their way, right? How they're called to serve.
I guess going back a little bit to your time in the Marine Corps, this question is probably hard to answer because you were exposed to a lot of good leaders. So we only get to name one.
Oh boy.
Yeah, after listening to the first three questions, or first couple questions, I have to limit you, otherwise we might run out of time. So if you had to pick one person and name one leader who influenced you the most in your time in the Marine Corps, but also your time afterwards, think about who that person is and why that sticks with you and who that person is.
Yeah. I mean, my boss is here. I could say him, right? But I'll choose a Marine that we both know well, Colonel Steve Hanscom, right? A retired Marine colonel. I think I met then Major Hanscom the first time at your house, Kevin. I can't remember what the occasion was, maybe a dinner party or something of that nature. And Steve Hanscom, I think, had just been selected for command, for lieutenant colonel, was going to go down to command artillery battalion. About a year later, though, right? The command selection came out early. And I went down to Camp Lejeune and was a battery commander, and then went up on division staff for a while. And then Steve Hanscom came down to 2nd Battalion, 10th Marines. He brought a young, hard-charging Major Schmiegel with him, I think, as the OPSO. And then I got to know then Colonel Hanscom a little bit better. He actually showed up a little bit before I changed command of my battery command, so I served under him for a few months. And of course, I mean, he was well known, particularly in the artillery circles, right? Probably one of the most talented artillery officers in the Marine Corps, if not the most talented. A little bit feared because of that too. More awe than anything else, right? I mean, but just a fantastic leader. And I had the fortune to come back to the battalion. I took over Kevin's job as the OPSO. Kevin moved up to be the XO. And Steve was our battalion commander for that year. And just the lessons that we learned from him. And little things and big things, right? Taking care of our Marines, right? I mean, really serving those Marines, right? When you talk about service, a Marine officer, and it doesn't matter if it's a commissioned officer, a warrant officer, or even a non-commissioned officer, Marine leaders are to take care of their Marines, because we know those Marines are the ones that are going to take care of us. And take care of us meaning they're the ones that are going to get the battles won, right? And really, he impressed upon us on how we treat our Marines from the day they show up at the battalion to the day they leave, right? And I mean, little things. I remember asking about where our Marines lived, right? And of course, we'd walk over to the barracks, right? Check out the barracks, make sure the barracks are in good order. That's just normal business in the Marine Corps. But they would ask about Marines living out in town. Have you been by their house? I'm not going to do a wall locker inspection of a Marine in his quarters. No, but you're going to drive by his house and make sure the landlord's not taking advantage of him. And sure enough, we did that, and we had a Marine who was living with a landlord that wasn't taking care of him, right? Parking lot looked like crap, weeds growing out of anywhere. And, well, how can I resolve that? I don't know, go figure it out, right? Go figure it out. And we'd engage with the landlord, right? To make sure that they're upholding their end of the bargain, right? Because some young Marine may not know how to do that. Or more importantly, his young family may not know what to do when that Marine's away, right? Little things like that.
And even after.
And even after. So Steve Hanscom has been a mentor of mine since the first moment I met him. And throughout my career, whether it was, career advice, family advice, he made it a point to get to know our families, not just his officers, but his Marines' families. And he stays in contact with a lot of them today, right? Because we share those stories.
Yeah, I mean, what makes me most happy about this, Sherman, is that when you asked me that question, I came up with Steve Hanscom too.
I'm dying to meet him now.
Right. Maybe we do a solidarity of service with Steve Hanscom, because in some ways, like, he defines what this is all about. His intersections with different people have led us to this path too. And there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of stories where people, if you ask them, they would share the same name. And it goes to my point about heroes not wearing capes. Like, we could have picked some very senior people who our lives have intersected with too, but we both named Steve Hanscom. I like coming up with the answer first too, because Paul and I have that background too, but it's an interesting intersection again, because this wasn't rehearsed, we didn't talk about it, and the same person comes to mind. And the reality is, now we're serving together again in a nonprofit, and we're trying to create the same family with our team, with our volunteers, this sense of community. We said at the beginning of the year we wanted to create an unstoppable team. That was our number one goal. And we know every single person on our team. We know our volunteers. We know their families. And that's because of Steve Hanscom, because he taught us that. I guess where we're talking about nonprofit work, Paul, I think everyone would like to hear how you made the transition. Probably a little bit obvious, but you could have done anything. And I obviously recognize that and did what all good CEOs do. I swooped in and grabbed you because I knew the value you would add, but you had to make a decision. And I guess reflect a little bit on why you're serving, really from the day you took the uniform off to the day you get to wear a red Operation Gratitude t-shirt or a black Operation Gratitude t-shirt, which in itself is a good perk on the job, but tell everyone why you decided to continue your service and what it's been like for the last 2 years, and don't say anything bad.
Yeah, I remember it was probably late September of 18, and we actually had a hail and farewell with the organization I was with. And my phone rings, and Kevin and I have kept in touch over the years, but I probably haven't talked to you for maybe at that point, several weeks, right? I mean, we run together on occasion, and that's how we catch up. And I remember it was actually during the final part of the hail and farewell, so you're kind of engaged, and my phone rings. I look down, and I I told my wife, I'm like, hey, it's Kevin. I'll call him back. I'll call him back on the way home. And I put my phone in my pocket. And I didn't call you on the way home. I called you when I got home. It was late at night, relatively, 9, 10 o'clock at night maybe, and I called you back. And we talked for about an hour. And you were asking me about what I was going to do. And I actually told you, hey, I'm actually going to go see my monitor, in a couple of weeks. And you said, before you see your monitor, in the Marine Corps, your monitor is who's going to give you your next assignment, right? And I was coming up on, my 27-year mark, so I could do one more tour to get to 30. And we talked a lot that night, and then we talked again and set up a time to meet. But I was getting ready to go on this trip. And I said, oh, let's meet after I get back from the trip. And the first conversation I had with Kevin, I thought that it's so funny the work we've been doing lately, because I thought to myself, care packages? I mean, that's great. It's great what they do. We had talked about Carolyn again in the organization. I knew the value of what they were doing in terms of the gratitude and the resolve it was giving service members. I knew the value there. But I didn't see the full picture. And then the next conversation I did on the phone, and you were coming up with the Bridge Council at the time and sharing information about that and talking about, this real problem that exists in our nation, division writ large, but very specifically to the military community, and really the greater divide between civilians and those who serve. And when I heard about that, I remember I told my wife, man, I'm going to go see Kevin in a week. I don't know if I can wait a week. I want to have this discussion now. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to see what this was about. And intersection, right? I got a text from you, and you said something like, hey, can we meet tomorrow instead of, the planned engagement, which was about 10 days later. So we met up at the Navy Marine Corps club up there in D.C., right?
Army Navy Club.
Army Navy Club. Marine Corps has got to own a club. Army Navy Club up and then once that happened, we talked. I think you were trying not to let me get too excited, right? And then I went out and visited and got to know the team, right? And to really see firsthand who they were. And you find out what makes them tick, right? The people that work at Operation Gratitude, that serve, I shouldn't have said work, that serve at Operation Gratitude, whether they're employees or volunteers, they're there for a reason, and everybody has a story, right? So I started to learn those stories, right? A daughter of an Air Force veteran, a mom of a Marine, a spouse of a Marine, somebody who served as a Marine. We had somebody who served in the Army who had received a care package from us when he was overseas. When you hear their stories and what brought them to Operation Gratitude and why they serve, right? It wasn't about having a job. And then I just, oh man, that was it, right? Hook, line, and sinker. And then you can start to see the value, right, of what this organization does and how it goes well beyond that care package, which is a beautiful care package, and it's a great thing. But if you can take it a step further and you can have this level of impact, bring people together, in some cases give people hope about the future, that's what that kind of sold me. So as I was looking, and I had challenging times in my Marine Corps career too, where I questioned my purpose, right? My purpose as a Marine, my purpose as a person, my purpose as a father, all those things. And Operation Gratitude gave me purpose, right? So when you combine passion with purpose with hope, ding, 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 that's the three, right? And that's what made me want to continue my service in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that purpose, that hope, we talked a little bit about courage last podcast, and you asked me that question, and you mentioned a story that Paul had shared with you about a care package recipient who had written, and you read it, and we talked about the word hero and courage. I guess it would be great if you could share what your definition of those two words are, and maybe combine the two if you want. I think they're kind of synonymous in some ways, and people treat them that way. But when we talk about service, we've run into a lot of people who kind of typify that word. So what do you, I guess in the context of people and what the word means, what does it mean to you?
Sure. So sometimes we look at heroes as these larger than life, characters, whether it's in a comic book like a Superman or something like that, or in our line of work in the Marine Corps, it's it's people like Dakota Meyer and Kyle Carpenter. And I've never met Dakota, but I've met Kyle a couple times, and what an incredible young man, right? I mean, I'm in awe in his presence, right? And actually, he was in uniform. I met him one time, and it was an honor for me to salute him as a Medal of Honor recipient. And to hear him talk, because he talked to some of my Marines after that, and to hear how he addressed them, and just what an incredible individual, right? And what propels men like that to do these, heroic acts? It is courage, right? But it's service too, and I'm sure they were afraid during those moments, right? It's not this. There's no. They don't erase the fear that's there, but they continue on for some reason, right? And it's that courage, it's that love for their fellow man, their fellow Marine in this case, or Marines, and what they're going to do to resolve the situation, right? So they just step up, and we see that in everyday life, right? The courage to, some people sometimes it's just the courage to get up every day, right? Depending on what you're challenged with, right? The courage to try something new, the courage to step up for someone or something that's the right thing to do. Steve Hanscom, we talk about him, and for him and for me, in the interactions we have, it's the courage to do the right thing for your family sometimes. When it may not be the popular thing that you want to do or the thing that you want to do, but it's so it's about that service, right? And so for me, that's it, right? And there's heroes everywhere you look, and some people don't like that. The everyday hero. Maybe there's this fear that we're diluting the real heroes, right? I think we have to just different people react to different situations in different ways, and I think there's an opportunity for other people to step up, right? A good friend of ours, Janice Chance, who's a Gold Star mom, right? She's a hero, right? Because she gets up every day and goes out and serves, and it's that level of service that she can offer somebody else. Somebody who lost their son, who was a Marine, and I know it takes courage and resolve for her to get up, and it's all based around service, right? That's what gets her going, because she knows she's going to serve others, right? That's what she's called to do, right? It comes back to that. You used that word before, Sherman, about a calling. I used to tell Marines that sometimes. They would come in and they would ask about, what they should do next, right? Get out of the Marine Corps now. We've always had those discussions with our Marines, right? They're up in their time in the Marine Corps, their enlistment's up. Do I do one more? And being a Marine is a calling, just like being in the clergy or being a first responder, right? It's a calling. It's a vocation. And for people like Janice or Dakota or Kyle, right? That moment for those two gentlemen, that was their calling, right? And they fulfilled it in a very heroic way, right?
And Kevin alluded to a conversation you and I had about a gentleman who received the box, the care package, whatever you want to call it, and found the courage to ask for help. And it really, it's easy to overlook how important that is. That's why a lot of service members and veterans choose a different path. They end their pain in a way that we'd rather they not, because sometimes it's too hard to ask for help. It just feels cowardly, but it's actually the reverse. It's courageous to say, you know what, I've done some pretty awesome things in my life, but I need some help with this one. And you talked about the soldier who got the package and actually found a way to break through by asking for help and get better.
And then helping others.
Exactly.
And it's a lot of times when you talk to servicemen and women that are struggling, particularly with those invisible wounds of war, right? And when you ask them that question, well, why haven't you asked for help? And one of the responses I hear more than others is they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand. And I think the answer back to that is, well, help us understand, right? And some of that is just to listen, right? And if you think about what Operation Gratitude does, by bringing communities together, we create the venue to learn and to understand what it's like to be a combat veteran who struggles with PTSD, or understand what it's like to be a military spouse whose husband or wife is away all the time. Understand what it means to be a child of a first responder, right? Who are fearful when mom and dad go to work every day. I met these children. A youth group came to our one of our assembly days in LA, the one we did in February. And through a church group, these kids were young teenagers. And so afterwards, I talked to them about service and asked them if anybody there knew anybody that served. There were 2 kids in there whose dads were in the LA County Sheriff. And I said, what was that like growing up? And they said it was hard. And in a different way than it was for my kids, right? When I was gone for 6 months, 8 months at a time or whatever it may be. Their dad goes away every day. But when he goes to work, he puts on a bulletproof vest, right? And you and I understand what that means. But a 4, 5, 6-year-old kid, right? And now fast forward to all this craziness that's going on in our environment today and what's in social media and the news. And our kids are reading that, right? As much as you try to shelter from it, they see it, right? And we met a police officer in Arlington who talked about some of his policemen that worked for him, policemen and women. And they were having struggles going to work, not because they couldn't get up and go to work that day, but because they would come downstairs ready to go to work, grab that cup of coffee, and their kids had barricaded them into their house. Mom and Dad, you can't go to work today. I'm afraid you won't come home. Right? So help us understand what that means, right? So you go back to servicemen and women that are struggling with PTSD. And when I say servicemen and women, I'm talking all services, right? Firefighters, police officers, our medical communities that see horrific things every single day, and of course our warriors in the military. And again, they don't want your pity. They don't want you to feel bad for them. But maybe if we understood them a little more, we could help them get through that and bring the community close together and rally around them the same way the community rallied around Beth and I when she was sick, right? The same way the community in Camp Lejeune or Camp Pendleton or Fort Campbell, right, or Norfolk, Virginia, will rally around the Marines, the sailors, the soldiers, the airmen that come back from the deployment, right? They rally around them. They give them that proverbial hug. We got to create those opportunities elsewhere, right? To learn more about men and women who serve, try to understand it a little bit, and that makes our appreciation go that much further.
I think one of the things when I met Dakota, I told Kevin this. One of the first things he said to me was, "Thank you for your service." And I'm looking at him like, "Are you kidding me?" But I think it's, heroes have heroes too. Heroes have heroes, and those people we consider courageous, they're motivated, but they're also helped by people who are willing to put together gestures of kindness and random gestures of encouragement, and that's what motivates them. So I think, the folks listen to this podcast that in their minds hadn't done anything awesome in their life will find themselves heroes in the eyes of people who do what you described, which is face danger every day. They need help too. They need motivation. They need heroes too. So this is another way for everyday citizens to do that.
Yeah, and I think you talked about children serving with Operation Gratitude, which is pretty cool, and you also mentioned Marissa, who's with us today, serving. I guess this is a great topic to talk about your own kids now, and not just Marissa's decision to serve, but talk a little bit about Nick and Joey and even Sam, and how they've kind of also found their own paths to service, and how that makes you feel, and I guess what the potential is, right, for them in this environment right now, in a country that's looking for more service, not less.
Yeah, so my daughter obviously talked about her being here today, and she's done several events with us for Operation Gratitude. Assembly days that we've done here on the East Coast.
Deliveries.
She went with her Uncle Kevin for a couple of deliveries. And she's even helped me at home make paracord bracelets. And we did an event at our church that she went and helped with to support Operation Gratitude. And she studied, healthcare, health services, and she just is completing her master's in public health. So she wants to continue her service in that way. Right now, she does a lot of work with patient outreach with the company she works for. And then next in line is my son Nicholas, who, as a youngster, I never would have thought he would have wanted to go in the military. Just didn't seem that way. But as he got older, and he had an experience through an injury that he had from playing soccer, that brought him to Fort Belvoir, and he met some doctors who, one of them invited him up to the Naval Academy, really to go through some treatment up there, some of the facilities they had. And then he took a tour of the Naval Academy and started asking a lot more questions. This was back in his maybe sophomore, junior year of high school. And then he actually wanted to go to the service academies, but didn't get selected, and then ended up going to the Citadel in South Carolina. And he went there initially on a naval scholarship, a naval ROTC scholarship, and thought he might go in the Navy or maybe the Coast Guard. And I remember distinctly him talking to me on the phone one time, and he said, "Dad, when we meet and the Marines go over here and the Navy go over there, and I feel like I'm in the wrong place." So we talked about that a lot, and I wanted it to be his decision. I'm not sure my wife wanted it to be anybody's decision at that point, but he decided to become a Marine, so he did all the things he had to do, and then was commissioned a year ago May. So and now he's actually out of 29 Palms at ITX training with his Marines out there now. So followed my footsteps, Kevin's footsteps. He's an artilleryman like we were, and has just done an exceptional job so far. So we're proud of him. And then his younger brother Joey, who's a senior at James Madison University studying biology. I think watching me and watching his brother, he had this desire not just to serve, but to have that kind of brotherhood that he saw that I had growing up. Right? He saw me with my Marines. He saw me with my Marine family. Right? I mean, I half kidded by saying Uncle Kevin, but my kids have been calling him Uncle Kevin since they could speak. And Uncle Rod, another Marine, and my brother, if he's listening, I think it pisses him off a little bit, right? Because he'll say, "What do you mean, Uncle? I'm your uncle," right? But they were around when they were little, right? Kevin and Rod and others. So Joey was looking for that too. The military environment may not be the right environment for him, so he found the fire department, and over the course of maybe the last year and a half, completed his fire certification training 1 and 2 and some other specialized training, and is a volunteer firefighter out in Rockingham County, out in the western part of Virginia, and is looking to continue that, right, to make that a career. He was thinking maybe the medical field, but maybe he'll take a detour for a while and look for a full-time job as a firefighter when he graduates here in 2021. So, and then Sam is my youngest. He's coming up. He's still a high school kid and looking for how to get involved. But he's volunteered at Operation Gratitude as well. He's been to events, Baltimore. He's been up to Philadelphia. He's been here at the DC Armory, and he comes and he learns about service. Through that active hands-on piece. And because he's younger, he didn't see some of the same things his brothers and his sister saw growing up. Just not quite the same. They had more time in the Marine Corps than he did, so to speak. But I can see that sense of service in him too, and he's asking those kinds of questions that the others asked. So yeah, it's neat they see it through the example, not my example, right? But those that I've been around. Again, we come back to Steve Hanscom. Steve Hanscom is Sam's, my youngest. Steve is his godfather, right? And he provides a lot of continuity for our family. He's the guy that we go to, particularly when my dad had passed away. Steve he's kind of filled that role for me for quite some time as that surrogate father, probably since I first met him. We value what he says and thinks. It's funny too, because we'll ask ourselves, right? My wife will even, geez, what do you think? Maybe we should call Steve, right? Or around my house, it's still Colonel Hanscom, right? We still have a hard time calling him Steve because he's always been Colonel Hanscom for us. But when you find people like that that you can rely on, they become part of your family too. So Kevin talks about my children, but it's so linked to the community, right? Again, it comes back to community, right? Why? Because they understand, right? They've been there with us.
Sherman, I'm going to wrap this up. Do you have any other questions for Paul? I got a rapid fire one for him too.
No, I want to see if we can keep Paul on his toes.
Yeah, let's do that. So one of the questions that we should ask is, it's funny because I probably know how you're going to answer this, but kind of your favorite life lesson quote, your favorite quote, and now how has that influenced you before and now, and is that a tough one?
Well, this is an interesting answer. We'll see what you think about this, but I'll go back to the scriptures, right? The Gospels, and if you think about, what's the most important commandment, right? The second most important commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And that, we talk a lot about selfless service as Marines, right? But, what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And who is your neighbor, right? Who is your neighbor? And we could talk a lot about what that means. I won't go into those theological discussions because I probably won't get it right. But to me, that's that golden rule your mom taught you growing up: treat others the way you want to be treated. But it's beyond that, right? It's beyond that. It comes down to service. That's why I like that quote so much. And I think that's a good way to live your life, right? It's a hard way to live your life. It truly is. But if you love others the way you want to be loved and supported and served, right, and treated, that leads you to a life of service, I think. And so that's why I would answer the question that way, right? It just ties directly back to service.
I think that's a great way to finish. We talked a little bit about that, and when I talked about why I was called to serve in the Marine Corps, I talked about my dad first, and then I talked about my mom and that golden rule too. And it's probably something we'll see a lot more as we're doing the next podcast and the next podcast after that. I knew a lot of the answers that Paul was going to give because I've known him for a long time, and certainly know him even better now after 2 years at Operation Gratitude and serving side by side. But I think you learned a lot today too, Sherman, and so did our listeners. And I thank you, Paul, for joining us and talking about the solidarity of service.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.